Good morning. I'm Katie Kingery-Page, Associate Professor of Landscape Architecture at Kansas State University and a member of the 2015 CELA Hosting and Planning Committee. As a young art student in the 1990s, I viewed art practices in sculpture, film, and video as increasingly community-based, which eventually led me to seek a career as a landscape architect. The famous sculptor and conceptual artist Joseph Beuys had by this time already coined the term social sculpture, by which he meant art with direct and subtly resonant community impacts, art intended to create change. This idea of social sculpture captures the common ground between contemporary art and landscape architecture. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce Lauren Bon, our opening keynote of the 2015 CELA conference. Bon's work as the founding artist of Metabolic Studio in Los Angeles embodies the idea of social sculpture, inciting change and changing insight in a way that both inspires and reciprocates landscape architecture practice. From her 2005-2006 work, Not a Cornfield, in which Bon brought attention to an urban brownfield site and eventually incited the conversion of this site to a functioning state park, to the recently published Under Spring, Voices, Art, and Los Angeles, a reflective look at her studio's transformation of lost urban space under a bridge into a setting for diverse community arts and gatherings. Bon seeks to change our insight of what exists and what can be. Bon's work has been acclaimed and covered by many cultural organizations and news outlets, including video features by the nation's largest independent public television station, KCET, as part of its Artbound series. Today, Ms. Bon will focus upon her work in the mineral and water extraction landscapes of the Intermountain West. In Bon's own words, her studio's 10-year project in reconnecting Los Angeles with the water that feeds it began with Not a Cornfield and culminates in her current work, bending the river back into the city. Her practice looks deeply at the Intermountain West, the vast landscape whose peaks and valleys include the Great Basin and 3 major rivers, the Columbia, Colorado, and Rio Grande. Her talk will include both the description of her realized works and the context her studio works within to create a sustainable, prophetic landscape in the Intermountain West. Lauren Bon's keynote address will officially open the 2015 CELA conference, Incite Change, Change Incite. Please join me in welcoming Lauren Bon.
Thank you, Metabolic Studio. This is the Sonic Division playing for you, Kansas State, live from the LA Riverbank at 7:30 in the morning today, as filtered through the silos on the edge of the Owens Dry Lake, 240 miles away from there. In a 100-foot silo, that's a resonant chamber for the sound my band plays when we play at the edge of the LA River. We do this to connect ourselves with the source of our water as an homage. We sing to the water every day. And by singing to her, we ask her permission to bend her next year about this time back into the city. Isn't that exciting? This is a world-changing potential exercise. How an art project that began with 1 seed of corn has over 10 years become the possibility of the first piercing of an infrastructure device, a flood control channel, which has done its job so well for so long. How it can turn that into a river plain again without unbridling the infrastructure that's working for us today. And to change our thinking through changing our behavior. If our thinking is that we can manifest change through skills, savoir-faire, and political strategies, perhaps part of the problem about reinventing landscape is once again asking permission of the landscape for the changes we want to exact upon her. So in that way, the sound that you're hearing today is that permission. We're using sound and vibration to do that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say thank you, Metabolic Studio, and return us to Kansas State. But it's a little bit scary here, isn't it? So I'm going to turn back on just the silos so we can hear the difference between the LA-based studio playing into the silo and the silo as an environmental imprint without human mediation. It's only a moderately windy day today. I can hear that by the high pitch of the Aeolian ARP cables. Can you hear that high pitch? Almost the vibration passing through. That's an early morning breeze. I know it because that cable is stretched where an east to west wind blows. The sunset goes the other direction. Do you hear the birds? It's early spring in this arid landscape. We've had record-breaking no snow again this year. The water engineer that I work with, Mark Hanna, said to me last year, if we don't get a better snow peak this year, the shit's gonna hit the fan. So I may be looking for land here in Kansas. And I want to thank the Prairie Studies Initiative for bringing me out. It's been incredible to stay out on one of the research properties that is here and to have my first exposure to the plains be the land the buffalo might have roamed on, because they too were great sonic communicators. Imagine a world where hundreds and thousands of buffalo roamed on this hard-rocked prairie and plains. Imagine what that sound would have been like. Thank you, Linda. I met Linda Duke in this silo, by the way. So this is by way of a personal homage. You know, you meet wonderful people all around the world, but it's a very special person you meet in a silo on the edge of a dry lake bed, 240 miles northeast of anything in the world. And that's where I met Linda Duke. And here we are today listening to the silos together. What we were doing that day in the silo was incanting spirits of the past together. Quite a lot of what we try and do in the Metabolic Studio is to repurpose places that have been desecrated by different modalities of being. So, for example, this great landscape that the silos sit on is the highest point and the lowest point in the North American continent. We have Mount Whitney and Death Valley meeting right where the silos sit. So it's almost like an acupuncture needle, kind of neatly dropped on this place of geologic importance. If we listened to the soundtrack all day long, which I sometimes do, and so does the studio, we have this on all the time, you would be able to understand your day at work, not by hours, but by when the military jets race over this landscape. This is the landscape which was the test grounds for Gulf War fighting strategies. It looks most like the Middle East. So we have Edwards Air Force Base and they nearby, and they're very much part of the sonic experience of the dry lake bed. And in fact, where my idea to reconnect sound and vibration, like they suggest in the Kabbalah, as a generative principle, was from the sound of the military jets going overhead. It was such a unifying envelope, the roar of the speed of flight, that I thought, I wonder if something like that could be done on a water table level. So if I were able to use these giant ruins as resonant cavities and stretch steel cable like the root system of perennials in the plains deep down under the dry lake bed, I would reach an area where there is water. And we know that that's the largest conductor naturally of sound that we know is water. So if I could build this kind of aeolian arc under the dry lake bed to the other side where the old Bessie Brady used to dock, might that have agency in taking this desiccated dry lake bed and helping it, nudge it forward into life again? So the origin of this piece that you're listening to, which is still in process, we are right now just boring down deep into the bottom to connect to the water table, and we have secured a relationship with the people on the other side of the dry lake bed to move that sound, and then reconnect that sound on the internet with Los Angeles, where we're about to pierce that river jacket and bring the sound of the Owens Valley into the water that's being bent back into the city, to bring that water, which has moved 240 miles to the city and then been used and then flown into treatment, dribbled into treatment centers and then released again before it's picked up by our dam and moved and treated again. Why shouldn't part of that treatment be a song, and a song of home? So these are some of the themes that we've been working on for 10 years. And I thought that today I would introduce you to the project through an ongoing part of it, which is sound. And you can hear the sound anytime on the internet on KPPG Live. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to turn on a film that I've made that's about 35 minutes. It will take up the rest of this talk, and I will stop the film. It's meant to be interactive for questions, or when I think you might have questions, to catalyze a conversation before we go on. And beyond, CELA Conference, Insight Change, Change Insight, Kansas State University, March 25th, 2015, Lauren Bon in the Metabolic Studio, where it is understood that extensive human occupation of the Intermountain West goes back more than 11,000 years, and the arid lands between the Eastern Sierra and the Rocky Mountains were home to a dense network of groups with an average population density of about 1 person per square mile. This is a portrait of Los Angeles' watershed. The black is the Great Basin. It's understood that the region today has 3 major rivers, the Columbia, the Colorado, and Rio Grande, which are thoroughly harnessed to power and water grids. This is the imprint of the two ancient lakes, Bonneville and Lahontan. Even the ancient remains of two prehistoric lakes, Bonneville and Lahontan, are being slowly and methodically siphoned off to far-off cities, and the remaining water table toxified by radioactivity. This is a picture. Every orange dot is a uranium mine.
We who aspire toward a nation that protects living things find it difficult to escape the irresponsible actions that have rendered vast territories of our continent unusable. Here's our analytical map of our inheritance, the as-built of the North American continent, with the major water bodies and the major tributaries that fall from there. Here's a contour map of the North American continent, and you can see the as-built of the mountain ranges as dark black lines, and the deserts in white. The sea, of course, is also white as the lowest contours. You can see the Great Basin and the Sierra. You can see the Central Valley of California. And what's tinted pink is the beginnings of the footprint of the nation of Rose. The coalition of watersheds, as Newton and Helen have already explained, has the least presence of human impact and the most presence of the violence exacted in the North American continent. The orange dots here are uranium mines that are mostly concentrated around the Colorado River, which was the river that John Wellesley Powell is so well known for exploring. And John Wellesley Powell is also the explorer who the United States commissioned many explorations across what was known as the arid lands, and he came back with a very sensible way of looking at habitation of the arid lands, which was that we should live within the concept of the drainage basin, that the Intermountain West was largely geographically about ridges and basins, and all of those basins contain the remainder of the two great ancient lakes, Bonneville and Lahontan. So while the land is arid, the basins are actually full of water, and any settlement could survive if we learned basin by basin how to govern ourselves. So his proposition in the 1870s and the 1880s, when the United States was looking to acquire the arid lands, was that we think not about land acquisition, but we think instead about of water basin government. So the coalition of Rose, the country that we propose forming so that we can allow entropy rebalance to occur, is in many ways part of this re-looking at the Powell map. I used a legal format called a convention. The UN allows conventions to be read, which allow for the redefinition of country or continent. Gandhi, for example, wrote a convention that he delivered at the UN on human rights. What I'll read with this animation of the hydraulics of Los Angeles and its relationship to the Intermountain West is a convention on the elimination of all forms of aggression on the watersheds of roads. We define ourselves as a nation for the purpose of a common language. Natio, or the place that we're born, is a term which unites us rather than separates us, in the way prior national boundaries have often done so. We do so with the single purpose of healing and supporting the watersheds of our common asset, the peaks and valleys of the Intermountain West, and forming this coalition to speak for all those living beings who cannot speak for themselves, the vanishing wild animal kingdom that still survives in Rose Cow, or the Coalition of Watersheds. Convinced that the establishment of Rose will protect the well-being of the 4 adjacent watersheds, the Columbia, the Colorado, the Rio Grande, and the Great Basin, and taking into account that Rose's territories are within the footprint of the Intermountain West. Like rivers, our nation's boundary aspires toward the shoreline. Part 2, bearing in mind that whenever possible, we, the citizens of Rose, will not tolerate any aggression towards our watersheds, including, but not limited to, exploitive mining operations, energy grids that compromise life forms, toxic residue burials, desecration of sacred spaces, outmoded short-term gains to support mega developments in outside watersheds. Part 3, emphasizing that parts of the Great Basin, Columbia, and Colorado watersheds are highly damaged by uranium mines, nuclear test sites, and plutonium production. In addition, the Columbia River and Colorado River and Rio Grande are polluted by agricultural runoff, human waste, and industrial pollutants such as arsenic, dioxin, and PCBs. The Colorado River, Columbia River, and Rio Grande are heavily dammed to provide power for major cities, and water for agriculture drastically changes the river's ecosystems and jeopardizes the survival of native and anadromous fish populations. Part 4, aware that the snowpack of the Sierra Nevadas, the Rocky Mountains, and the Cascade Range has been fully allocated for human use, leaving very little water for ecosystem functions. The current economic growth model is incongruent with the physical reality of water availability in the watersheds of Rose. Bearing in mind that global warming is threatening the coastlines on both sides of the continent and will likely have a destabilizing effect on climate throughout the world, the country of Rose is formed to face the challenges of adaptation to new climatic conditions and the goal of preserving life for all living beings. Affirming that Rose accepts responsibility for the glacial time rebound of our common watershed, together we organize ourselves around tending to this long-term, patient waiting rather than exploiting her natural assets for short-term gains.
"100 mules. 100 mules walking the Los Angeles aqueduct. The labor force that built the contemporary city, that built the Panama Canal, that built the soil of the whole continent." Do I have any questions? Does everybody understand that that performance was a declaration of a new country? That was delivered in Reno at the Museum of Art and the Environment in Nevada, which is part of Rose, or that country that I'm saying should exist to protect the watersheds. Any questions about that? Lynn? For me, as an artist, language is really important. And 5 years ago, when I was doing Strawberry Flag, which was a project for the VA hospital in Los Angeles, I discovered that strawberries are part of the rose family. And I thought, what an incredible thing. They come from all of the places where there's the most homeless vets, Texas, Florida, and California. And there's nobody I've met that doesn't have a positive memory about a strawberry or a rose. So it, for me, was an evocation of one of the big prizes that water gives you. It's a carrot in front of the horse kind of country. Who wouldn't want to be part of a country called Rose? Any other? Linda, you had a question.
I wondered about the date that the 100 Mules walked.
Thank you. Bending a river back into the city was a proposal for a centenary project for the opening of the LA Aqueduct. The LA Aqueduct was opened November 5th, 1913. The LA Aqueduct was made possible by Roosevelt creating a Reclamation Act of 1903. So the LA Aqueduct was one of the first big symbols of manifest destiny. That so was a part of that particular era in our cultural history. So as a critical icon, not just for Los Angeles, but for the conquest of the continent, I felt that it was worthy of a real survey, like a state of the object. My proposal was received by the Department of Water and Power as a celebratory action. It was not intended to be either celebratory nor denigratory of the action. It was meant to be an observation of fact that the LA Aqueduct is a real object that conveys water from the snowpack of the Sierra to the city and allowed the city of Los Angeles to become more than just a depot to ship goods and materials to the East Coast. It allowed it to become a film center. That was its primary, it was a company town to begin with. That's what really made it grow. So filmmaking itself is very much part of the story. And as we move forward, I will be showing you a kind of swath of film that begins in the cornfield 10 years ago and moves into the beginning explorations that I started to make with film as a means to convey connectivity between what we were doing in the center of an urban blighted void in the historic core of our city, and with another void, a 100-mile void on the dry lake bed, a 100-mile scar of removing water from a place. So it had two ovoid scars of the industrial era that I was trying to reconnect through sound and image. And when you reconnect something through sound and image, you have a film. So it seemed like a logical format for that conveyance. And part of the uber narrative of this large story is that film itself, like corn growing in the center of an urban area, is a device of wonder that can often bring people like moths to light to the production of film. So the idea of catalyzing dormant communities into action through filmmaking was also part of the exercise. So our film has the unique criteria for success of being a community engagement platform. We didn't really care if we got it screened or not, or whether it was good or not. We cared that people were interested in participating in it and that we had some creative medium rather than normal conversation about really difficult problems that we could experience together. So is there any other questions before I move on to this section? Yes. We walked the LA Aqueduct. So we were given permission by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power to walk the 240 miles of channels, siphons, and underground pipes that connect the Eastern Sierra with downtown Los Angeles over a 1-month period, ending last November. And the documentary is going to be screened. Thank you. The question was, what was the path that we walked with the mules? Thank you. And the answer was, it's the aqueduct itself. Does that answer your question? One of the questions that is sometimes asked to me is, how did you get permission to walk the aqueduct? And I said that it had to do with juju, good vibes. I've been working in the Owens Valley now for 7 years on creating community platforms for engagement and bringing the LADWP into that dialogue as a way to shift the paradigm from thinking about a headless hydra of a bureaucratic agency as we would a villain in a bad Western, because that doesn't serve us. What serves us is to realize that people have inherited a system that's failing, and they're doing the best job they can under very rigorous circumstances to work it out. And the way things happen is they keep on chopping off the head of the guy in charge or the woman in charge and replacing it. So there's actually, when you say LADWP, there is no person. It's just a large agency. And a lot of the work that we do at the studio is to exercise reciprocity between the agency and the communities that it's engaged with. So when they came to a moment of celebration, I went in to see them and asked them what they were going to do for the centenary of the opening of the LA Aqueduct, and they said they were going to show Chinatown and have a big party. And I said, we can do better than that. And they said, what do you have in mind? And I said, oh, no, I'm not going to tell you, you're just going to laugh at me. And they said, no, tell us. I said, no, really, it's a crazy idea. And I told them that I thought it would be a really great roving community feast to have 100 mules, the labor force that built the aqueduct, walk the whole aqueduct and host conversations with all the communities that it passed through as a way to commemorate this event. And they said, that's a brilliant idea. And that's how it happened. And I think sometimes simply building a good relationship with people over a long period of time and then participating as a friendly coach about best practices can really pay off. Not a Cornfield is not so much a happy story. That was my first run-in with bureaucracy, but it was an amazingly generative beginning. So can I move on? Yeah? Okay. Thank you for your patience, by the way. It's always difficult and exciting to try and share one's story while it's unfolding. Not a Cornfield, in the historic core of Los Angeles, begins the metabolic cycle of works that concludes with bending the river back into the city. Our journey to reconnect land and water has taken us from Los Angeles to the Eastern Sierra and across the Great Basin to the Rocky Mountains. We've learned to repurpose inert landscape into photographic materials and the vibration of sound into agency. There's a 32-acre piece of land in downtown Los Angeles that has long been known colloquially as the Cornfield. The designation Cornfield may echo from a time when this was a lush riverbank spot that supported Native American riparian culture. Alternatively, it might date from the late 18th century when the floodplain area was first cultivated and might have hosted a cornfield. Quite literally, the Not a Cornfield project was a cornfield. At the same time, though, it was also decidedly not a cornfield. For in addition to producing an agricultural site and tangible crop, the project highlighted the rural history and riparian geography of the place and realized the legend of the cornfield name, a symbol of hope, a visual metaphor for fresh life, a community resource, an intellectual arena, a dynamic social space, an environmental intervention, a metabolic sculpture. When it comes to land, there are at least two different kinds of ownership: the tenure claimed by a deed holder and the unlegislated possession that is endowed by proximity, memory, history, interest, and need. While both sorts of ownership were in operation at the cornfield site, it was only the deed holder who initially approved the Not a Cornfield project. Concurrent with the logistics of cleaning the site and readying it for planting, we undertook the process of gaining permission from the site's many unlegislated owners. While 450 tons of rock and 1,600 cubic yards of trash were cleared from the site, door-to-door visits with the cornfield's nearest neighbors took place as 30,000 cubic yards of topsoil were settled over fragile archaeological remains. Workers' programs were initiated to employ local residents, while two distinct growing areas, one hand and other machine planted, were established. So 90 miles of irrigation tape were laid through the field. By the end of the project's first stage, its brown phase, the cornfield's impoverished brownfield soil had been cleaned, leveled, irrigated, electrified, and transformed. 1 million seeds had been machine planted in straight furrows across the field, and radiating out from a central pit known as the Eye, a large spiral garden was in the process of being hand-sown. The first machine-planted corn shoot emerged on July 26, 2005. The chlorophyll revolution had begun. There seemed to be a direct relationship between the amount of green present in the field and the degree to which people welcomed and participated in the project. For they came in steadily, increasing through the green phase. And as the summer progressed, for example, regular docent-led tours, oral history gathering sessions, weekly drum circles augmenting the Sunday afternoon community garden sessions, and a drum circle that had been initiated during the brown phase. While a docent-led educational program began daily operations and a regular Friday evening gathering alternated The corn grew fast, and it grew at night. I think it's possible, even necessary, to imagine a cornfield that will contain both an official history and a host of informal memories. Let us begin here. The gold phase. By the end of October 2005, the Not a Cornfield crop is fully grown, and the irrigation system that kept it watered through the summer is switched off. As the corn dries out in preparation for the harvest, a gold blush spreads through the field and deepens to a rich amber hue. As they worked, so the harvesters also cut down some of the new golden stalks. They chopped circles in the field, which ranged from 30 to 60 feet in diameter, to create open-air rooms. A later crop grown to be stored against winter scarcity, corn has long been a symbol of abundance after labor, the hope for the return of light, warmth, and spring. And at the same time, the corn harvest is also associated with such markers of autumn's lengthening nights as Halloween and Day of the Dead. Resonating with the ambiguity of the symbol and the enigmatic quiet that settles upon a harvested land in winter, the harvest activity was followed by a period of thoughtful repose. The project's blue phase began on December 3rd with a ceremony attended by 1,500 people at which the blue phase lighting project was switched on. comprising a matrix of computer-controlled blue lights mounted on poles scattered through the field. The pattern of lights reflected the pattern of stars above the cornfield at the winter solstice, and they faded in and out of response to changing conditions around the field. Passing trains, temperature change, rain. When the blue lights were switched off, the mythic comes into action, and a group of flying monkeys enter the concrete jacket of the LA riverbed, conveying ancient Hopi seeds up and down the LA River channel, up and down the burial grounds of the Tongva and Gabrielino, fueled by an ancient Lakota myth that when a white woman comes bearing corn, so will the buffalo return. So once the blue phase is over, we go into the period of anabolic rebound, where the mythic flying monkeys of the radioactive waterbed come to life, because they are truly the controllers of the 240 miles of waterway that connect Los Angeles' often pagan downtown through the East Los Angeles urban corridors, gutters and drains, through the runoff from the mountains around Los Angeles, the Los Angeles forests, into the Mojave Desert that stretches endlessly, endlessly, endlessly up into the high desert plains, where the network of great basins that connected the snowpack of the Eastern Sierra and the Rocky Mountains once moved freely over very salty, often dry geologic lakes, teeming with life, teeming with birds, teeming with large mammals, and teeming with indigenous people that knew just how to live right there in the arid lands. Here we are inside the Pittsburgh plate glass factory, growing again, growing in a biblical way station, tomatoes that will never fruit, in a place way too hot, in a place where even our water supply from a deep artesian well is so salty that nothing can grow. But there the Wicked Witch of the West lives. The Wicked Witch is a very bad witch, but a very good musician. He has a black chauffeur-driven car that takes him up and down as he gathers sound recordings from the different places around the dry lake bed, because he knows what will set him free is not the many plans of the headless hydra of bureaucracy. What will set him free is water. He wishes to shed his witchhood. He wishes to melt like the Wicked Witch in Frank Baum's fairy tale. He wishes to be freed of the curse that has kept him more than human. And he knows the way to do this is sound. So he uses the silo as a resonant chamber, and he invites, once every full moon, all the ghosts of the literary past, all of the ghosts of the West. Mary Austin, Frank Baum, they're all there, as is Dr. McCabe. Dr. McCabe, the New Zealand heart pump inventor who lived in the silos last, is now the conductor of the Winky Orchestra, the glass and water orchestra from the people of the dust. And once a year, under cover of darkness, everybody gathers for the annual party of the Wicked Witch of the West. Dawn comes. Couldn't you just feel that party? And with the dawn, always the day after, comes the public event to share the energy created the night before. 200 people came that day that they allowed us to film Ritual. 200 people came from the city of Los Angeles and from the Owens Valley to listen to that sound so sweet it had the possibility of transforming the dry lake bed back into a place where the white dust would settle. The Pittsburgh Plate Glass Factory, which stands on the alluvial flats above Owens Lake, includes a large sheet metal covered fabrication facility and 3 large silos that have been unused since 1960s. Division of the Metabolic Studio uses sound to reconnect Los Angeles with the source of its water. Requiem for water. A truly infinite force leaves no room for differentiation within time and space, never mind patterns of nature. So the infinite must enter and remain infinite. Reality then is a paradox. 2 opposites must occur. The infinite creative force must be simultaneously both here and not here. All the dead voices, they make a noise like leaves, like sand. They all speak at once, each one to itself. Rather they whisper, they wander, they murmur. What do they say? They talk about their lives. Down, down. Here we're going down a silver mine, 900 feet. 900 feet. The silver mine is just above that dry lake bed where we were just singing in the silo. This is where the cable that stretches under the dry lake bed will go. It will go to the water table 900 feet where the silver comes from. That's where the optics division and I get the silver for our photography. We've rebuilt this silver mine, protected the mountain from falling in on it. This silver mine is the monument to the city of Los Angeles, just like the aqueduct. Cerro Gordo, this is the home of photography. The silver from this mine was shipped back east to be reconstituted as film stock, brought back along the same train lines that the silver was exported on to Los Angeles, to that very train yard I converted into a cornfield, and sent back up to where the silver mine is to make westerns. This is photographer's country. This is where Ansel Adams worked. This is where so many other artists have gone to capture majesty. And the optics division and I were formed around the idea that we would like to take one indexical image, indexical of this landscape, where every material composing a photo is a landscape material. So we started with this mining project. In this landscape, on the very top of the Inyo Range, just across from Mount Whitney, there's the silver mine in its own great basin. Here is Valley Crest, the secret weapon of the metabolic studio, literally securing a mountain from falling in onto a mine and then repairing the hoist house. This all happened 2 summers ago. The pulse you're listening to here is the pulse of one drop of water falling into the bottom of that mine. I have a speaker down at the base of that mine so that the sound you're hearing that I carry with me into lectures is from 900 feet below the surface. It's one drop of water falling. The optics division of the metabolic studio has harvested local chemicals to process the exposed film that will soon be made of celluloid derived from the crushed bones of local cattle and coated with silver that the team is mining from Cerro Gordo. Obtaining the silver required rebuilding the mine that was slowly subsumed by the surrounding peaks. And here's a picture from the past. People photographing the Sierra using a mule cam or a large format camera packed by a mule. Challenged by the great expanses of the Owens Valley, the optics division and I built our own camera inspired by this, but rather than move it on a mule alone, it's built out of the ubiquitous object of international trade, the shipping container. So we built this camera as an homage to being able to move around and take your own photography, and we call that camera the liminal, or the threshold, because the camera operates both as a tool and as a tool for perception, like a camera obscura. So when you go from the outside of the camera to the inside of the camera, you have a very distinct sense of moving from one world into the next. And we took it with 100 mules to document the landscape. So there you see me looking out of the camera, and then the image on the inside of the camera, which is upside down. So that gives you that strange sense of liminality. Looking through the camera lens. There's the camera. I share this work with the optics division, which includes Linda's son Tristan, who also met me that day in the silos, thank God, and my life partner Rich, and it's quite an adventure. Here's an image that we're making completely there's our bone crusher. That's an image developed in the dry lake bed of the dry lake bed. So these are indexical images. Their pictorialness is often compromised by their chemistry. And here's some of the liminal prints we've taken. We mine our own silver out of this process, so when we're developing these photos, which are each as large as the inside of a shipping container, they're massive prints, we collect the fluid that we develop our film in, and we take it to a place in Mojave Desert where they give us back a chunk of silver from it. This is the Zen archer, Hirokazu, who is a friend of the studios and a friend of Linda's as well, firing an arrow into the distance. So that ends the second section, the social sculpture section, and before I move on to how this all connects with bending the river back into the city, do I have any questions? Yes?
I'd like to know more about the structure of the metabolic studio and how you make decisions and what agency different members have.
Okay. It really depends project by project, but the metabolic studio is my studio. So these are all my projects. They're all my concepts. They're all my ideas. And I have a team of people that works with me to make them happen. So it's not collaborative, but we work communally, if that makes any sense to you. So, for example, the next project that we're getting to, bending the river back into the city, I'm the designer of the project, but it's a 3-part sculpture. It's got a dam that will cross the LA River, a 72-foot water wheel, and a distribution network that's a post-capitalist driven utility. And to make that piece happen requires teams for each element of that. So I have teams of consultants that work on a project like that. But the Metabolic Studio is 15 people, full-time, who work on every aspect of the creative and managerial parts of the practice. We don't have any managers, so I can talk to you more about that structure, but I just want to finish this like flow of the talk, and I've got 5 more minutes to go. Okay. Bending the River Back into the City, 2012, ongoing, reconnecting land and water in the historic core of Los Angeles and reinventing the Los Angeles River floodplain, a 3-part sculpture, a dam, a water wheel, and a distribution network. Here's the cymatic image of the water as it will look when it falls off the water wheel. It's a model that's currently extrapolated into an installation on view now at the Hammer Museum in Westwood. Here's a model of the water wheel that will cut the Metabolic Studio building in 2. It will be 36 feet underground and 36 feet above ground. The water tanks with the Roadrunner on it is one of our distribution networks will be able to, this is taking bottled water to a whole new level. Those are $5,000 tanks, and if you're part of the delta of Mount Whitney, the post-capitalist driven utility that the Metabolic Studio will be founding with my water right number 23619, the first private water right in the city of Los Angeles, then you will be part of the delta. Being part of the delta needs to also mean being part of the infrastructure. So as the bridge outside of our studio is currently being rebuilt, a historic bridge called Under Spring, named interestingly enough for an underground spring that used to run under here when the LA River was unbridled. It's currently being extended, and in that extension are the water pipes for the Delta network. So I managed, like getting a payload into outer space, I managed to get infrastructure to carry water pipes as an artwork. So they're listed as payload artworks. And then I built full-scale replicas of the walls they were building, and I said, if you don't pierce them, they'll be death traps. And so they've also used these water symbol, and these were just unearthed a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to show you what the LA riverbank looks like. It looks like graffiti. So our rocks are just endless miles of graffiti. This is what the dam will look like. You see the water wheel out in the back. It's a custom designed inflatable dam that will go down when there's heavy rains. But it will make something like a perceivable lake in downtown Los Angeles. And then when you see the dam where the green is, that is going, the water is going to be going under the railway tracks, and this concrete brick building is the Metabolic Studio building. So that's how it will look. Part of the Delta is also looking at history. Here's a piece of the original Zanja Madre, or Mother Ditch, being lifted from a construction site in Chinatown to become part of the Delta of Mount Whitney, or the greening of the area that will happen by using this historically appropriate tool of the water wheel to allow the river to bend back into the city. These are computer simulated drawings of the water wheel and the pit, which will be a pollinator habitat. And we are poised to break ground with this project in September and pierce the LA River jacket next April. So this is the first permanent work of the Metabolic Studio. Everything that we've done in the last 10 years is ephemeral, performative action oriented toward paradigm shift through creating a new perceptual concept of how the world might be. This is actually an infrastructure sculpture. And thank you very much. I don't know if there's any time for questions, so I'll be around for the rest of the day if anybody wants to speak with me.
Thank you so much, Lauren. What a wonderful way to start this conference, by having our insights changed by your amazing work. Thank you.